Disciples that make disciples. And just a little bit of what we talked about yesterday was around transformation, making the change, starting with us. We're the first disciples that we make. And we do that through availing ourselves to the power of the Holy Spirit in relationship with Christ Jesus and all under the lordship of God. And so all change, all transformation begins with the types of conversations that we have. All transformation begins with a conversation, whether it's our conversation with God, God's conversation with us, and our conversation with one another. And as those conversations deepen, as they grow, as we become more effective and efficient at those conversations, we actually produce fruit for the kingdom of God. And so we start with ourselves and we do our internal work. Today, I want to talk about when we've done that work, because we're always in the process of learning, of growing, of being available to God so that God can continue to do the good work in us, right? That work never really stops. It's something that we cultivate and we nurture day by day. And so as we continue to do that work, it then flows out into the community. It flows out to the people that we touch. Is it me? Keep going, okay. So we continue to do that work, and the work happens in disciple making. We are then charged with going out, taking it. The work can't just stop with us. We can't just hoard all this goodness of God for ourselves. We've got to share it with those who are around us. That's what it means to be a Christian. That was what the Great Commission was. Go ye therefore into all of the world, teaching people, transforming their lives for the sake of Christ Jesus. So today I want to talk a little bit about what will it take for us to get outside of our walls, the walls of our churches, the walls of the church, the walls of our own fear that keeps us from doing a new thing for Christ. What will it take for us to do that so that we can then truly make disciples who transform the world? We're going to talk a little bit building on the 5 discipleship conversations that we had yesterday: possibility, ownership, descent, commitment, and gifts. How do those then extend to the people that we're called to serve? Gil Rindle, who does a lot of development work in the United Methodist Church, is involved with the Texas Methodist Federation and does work with local churches that are looking to do a good thing, talks about 3 conversations that most churches need to have if they're really serious about transformation. That is a conversation about identity. Who am I? Who are we as a church? What is God calling us to do? Which is a conversation about purpose. And who is my neighbor? Who are our neighbors? And when we can have a conversation about context, who are we reaching? Who are we called to be in ministry with? Then we begin the conversations of transformation. We talk a lot in the church, and there's a theme or a term that's been used that I really like. I'm thinking that it's becoming one of those overused terms, but I think we're still in the very beginning stages of getting our heads and our hearts around what it means to be a missional church. To be a missional church where what we're doing is not about programs and policies, but it really is about advancing God's mission in the world. There's a book called Missional Renaissance by someone who's Reggie McNeil, who is not in the United Methodist Church, but has worked with the United Methodist Churches and has written books about this. And he says something really powerful about being a missional church that I want to share with you this morning as a way of getting us started. He says, missional is a way of living. It's not a program or an activity. Its emergency springs from the belief that God is changing God's conversation with the world and with the church. Being missional involves an active engagement with this new conversation to the point that it guides every aspect of the life of the missional believer. To think and to live missionally means seeing all of life, as a way to be engaged with the mission of God in the world. To think and to live missionally means being engaged with all of life as a way of advancing the mission of God in the world. That is a big chore. And when we think of all of life, usually we're thinking about all of the life that we're aware of, all of the life that's a part of our community. But yesterday, when we heard these wonderful stories of people who are doing risk-taking ministry, bookmobiles, and casting visions for working with people who go to dog shows, that's really all of life, all of creation. That's the missional church. When we begin to think of how do we engage in this new conversation that God is having with the church, that God is having with us, it takes risk-taking. It's that risk-taking commitment that helps move us closer to being the missional church. And if we are willing to take up the challenge, it really does mean paying attention to who is my neighbor. And so I want to spend just a little bit of time there with the who is my neighbor conversation. Because as we think about our neighbors, really there are different roles for the conference to play, for local churches to play, and what it means to reach out to our neighbors. The role of the annual conference is to steward and extend the mission of the United Methodist Church within the bounds of this Episcopal area. To steward and to extend, to ensure that our collective gifts are being directed and our priorities are being set in such a way that the things that each local church can't do by itself, we can do together. That's why the annual conference exists, to bring us together so that we're better than what we could be individually. So the conference is not in the business necessarily of disciple making, but it's of galvanizing all of the gifts of the lay and the clergy and the congregational leaders who are doing the on-the-ground ministry in such a way that we have extended what it means to be United Methodist, what it means to be a risk-taking follower of Jesus the Christ to all of life, all of human life, all of creation, within the bounds of the annual conference. So the neighbor that the annual conference is looking at are who are the people who are within the bounds that we must collectively serve together. When we do volunteer and mission projects as an annual conference, it's because the conference has a vision of who is our neighbor that's different than what your local congregation might have. But because you send from the local church to the annual conference, your lay people, they're part of a bigger mission, a bigger vision. This is what it means to be the connectional church. Everyone has a role. The role of the conference in Who is My Neighbor is different and needed than the role of the local church in Who is My Neighbor. And so the conference has neighbors that are all around the world, and there are some local churches that do that too, that have projects where they're in partnership with churches or projects in other countries. But the vision of Who is My Neighbor gets expanded. And so we think about, from a conference perspective, how do we bring these new conversations, the conversation of ownership and possibility, to looking at who our neighbors are all across the world, as well as those who are in this Episcopal area. When an annual conference stewards and extends the United Methodist witness, it is about helping people to know God, the people in the conference, but also the people that we serve that are outside of our churches, to proclaim Christ, to serve others, especially the poor, and to seek justice on behalf of the whole. We're working from the bottom up and allowing all of our gifts to grow and grow and grow in such a way that we can extend them in a powerful way. The work of the annual conference is to do those things that no one congregation can do by themselves. And so as you think further about who is our neighbor and thinking about the ways in which the vision that Bishop Steiner Ball and the other leaders of the conference are charging with, we're thinking about how do we do the things together that we can't do, or we can't do as well alone. That's the work of the annual conference in seeing who is my neighbor. And then there's a role for local churches. Well, you know what, let me go back to say one other thing. I've been made aware that there have been some conversations, I guess it was yesterday, there was a conversation about ministries in the conference, and one of those happened to be the Commission on Religion and Race. And so I want to stop just to use that as an example, because if I'm going to meddle, I might as well meddle in my own backyard. We have this wonderful thing called the Book of Discipline. And it says a lot of things about what we are supposed to be doing as people in the United Methodist Church. When it comes to being the missional church, we really need to think critically about how we're living faithfully into what the Book of Discipline has said. So this is what I will say about the Commission on Religion and Race, since that's my business. It's important. What's important is not the structure, it's the function. It's the work. What I say to people, even as the General Commission on Religion and Race was being evaluated at the General Conference, it's not about the agency, it's about the ministry. We don't need to have a General Commission on Religion and Race. What we need is someone willing to take ownership for the work of helping to challenge and to equip the church to reach more effectively more people, younger people, and more diverse people. You can call it whatever you want, you can structure it the way you want, but there needs to be an ownership conversation. That's the same thing I would say here. Yes, the Book of Discipline says we need or we shall have an annual conference commission on religion and race. Please don't create one just because the Book of Discipline says to. Create something, whatever you call it, because you have a passion for being a missional church that reaches out to the people who may look different than the people who are in this very room. And we know, yes, and we know that the work of the conference is that we can't do that work alone. We've got to do it together. So where's the ownership for it? Where's the ownership conversation about who's going to really help us to remain vigilant in ensuring that we're reaching new people for Christ, that we're not so insulated in looking and serving the people who are inside the boundaries of the church that we forget that the mission field is outside of these four walls and it's waiting for us to engage with it. Who's going to help? Who's going to be the owner? Who's going to be the risk taker that helps us to have that conversation in a sustained way? So I would say that until those kinds of questions are answered, not only about religion and race, probably other ministries too, we really are still in a conversation about who is our neighbor and what is our vision and who are we? What is God calling us to do and who is our neighbor? So continue to push the boundaries of those conversations so that in the end of the day, we can say that the conference, the denomination, every local church is being missional, not creating structures just to serve a purpose or to fulfill a check mark because that's what it says in the Book of Discipline, but because we are not ashamed to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ in every place there is within our reach. And that means that we need to have skills and abilities, and we need to have ownership of what it means to do that in new places where we may not have relationships, we may not have experience, and we may not have the plan to get it done. That's why you create a ministry in the conference. That's why you create all ministries in the conference, in service to the mission of Jesus Christ. It's about being a missional church, and the resources of the annual conference exist to do together what no one of us can do as well by ourselves. So I'm going to just pause right there because then I'm going to talk a little bit about the local church and to hear in terms of how we come together around a mission of reaching more people from Christ, which is a theme that I've been hearing every time that I've sat in and been listening to the sessions. I hear that theme in everything we're doing. How are we reaching more young people? How are we reaching out to folks who are not in our congregations on Sunday? How are we working together, creating a plan, strengthening, equipping, training one another together to do this work that we can't do by ourselves? What are some of the visions? What are some of the ways that you are seeing that this is happening that you might want to share? How do we work together to do things together that we can't do by ourselves? Where are you seeing that is happening, or where do you see that needs to happen more? And just a couple of people who'd like to share what it means to work together. Yes, microphone. One.
Ross Glodfeldy, Faith United Methodist Church, Cranesville. Everybody knows where Cranesville is, right? We have a Terriata Council of Churches, and recently we had a need in our community. The people in our senior apartments wanted to have services, so the Terriata Council of Churches got local clergy and laity. And we have somebody that goes in every Sunday to minister to those people. So, we're working together with other groups in the community to meet the needs of the people in the community.
Thank you. That really raises an excellent point about the fact that we can do things in partnership with people who are outside of the church. I mean, you're already doing this in every annual conference. This is a part of who we are as our identity. We partner with people in our community to do things together with them, and that helps to extend and steward the work of the annual conference. So thank you.
Scotty Milton, Marlon, Andre, Clergy, Greenbrier District.
Mic number 2. There you go.
Scott Ingleton, Clergy, Marlington Edgeray Charge, Greenbrier District. When I was first going to Marlington, I noticed there were some bars in town, and I told my district superintendent I was going to frequent them. And he cautioned me. He said, I agree with you, just make sure you take some of your church members. The first time I went in one, I prayed out in the parking lot first. And I went in and I found out they were already there. In February, I baptized 3 from that ministry.
Yeah. So there's a way, yes, and we're going to go next to microphone number 3, and then we'll finish with microphone number 2. But there's a way that we catch a collective vision, and we all begin to feed into that in a way that really does transform things. It's awesome. Yes.
Like many of you, we have a community. Oh, I'm sorry, Linda Hankins, equalization delegate from Midland South. Like many of you, we have a community cupboard in our town. And it is a cooperative effort of many churches. One of the ideas someone had was that in this community cupboard, we give out boxed food and packaged food, but we wanted to provide more fresh vegetables. So between the cupboard and our church was a patch of ground. And this spring, we tilled it and planted it. It is now growing and harvesting fresh green vegetables for the community cupboard. And to follow up on yesterday, I now have number 100 for my husband because he was one of the 6 men who toiled the ground. Tilled the ground.
Probably a little of both. He was toiling as he was tilling. But that is what it means to engage in a conversation with all of life. Those are the all of life conversations. It's all of human life, but it's all, how do we work together toward utilizing the resources that we have in the world to the benefit of God and God's people? Yes.
Deborah Schaefer, St. Paul's Parkersburg, Low Kanawha District. I actually have 2, and I'll try to make this really brief, but the gentleman before me reminded me. 3 years ago, well, first of all, our church sits on the south corner of 11th and Market, and the other corner has a bar. And 3 years ago, there was a horrible fire in the middle of the night where the bartender's family lived upstairs, and the mother and the daughter literally had to jump from the window into the arms of the firemen to be rescued. The entire establishment was devastated. The following Sunday morning, our class began to talk about the fire that had occurred on the other corner. And so Rich and one of our other Sunday school members chose to go to the bar's owner and ask what needed to be done to help her, and first of all, and she said, "I'm all right, I will be all right, but please help the family." And so we began an all-church effort to help that family. Well, fast forward, that was in the middle of the summer. Christmas came. And what could be lonelier than you have no other place to go on Christmas Eve but to a bar? So some of us had Christmas, again, went back to the owner and received permission to have Christmas Eve service at the Sly Fox.
Wow.
The owner made the preparations, moved the pool table to set up a little stage so that we would have someplace to work from. And we ministered that evening. And that has to be one of the most incredible Christmas Eves I have ever spent in my life. We, from time to time, have continued to try to minister to the folks who go to the bar. We had an ice cream social. We walked in, we gave out flyers and asked them to join us the next Sunday. And one fellow who was sitting at the bar said to me, "You mean you want me to come?" And I said, "Well, do you like ice cream?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, then I'd like for you to come." So anyway, that has been somewhat of an ongoing effort, but that is to minister out. But also, my pastor calls me now a Methodic or a Catholist because a year ago I took a position with Catholic Charities West Virginia. And I had been on the job 10 days when the derecho hit, and I had discovered 48 hours prior to that I was to serve as the disaster coordinator for my region.
Wow.
I cover 9 counties, and some of those counties were some of the hardest hit. So as I tried to do the best that I could when I had not really been able to establish all of my connections yet, I called once again upon my United Methodist brothers and sisters in that region. And I got the word that Roane County needed food for 1,000 people. And it was a little bit like the fishes and the loaves. Well, how am I going to do this? But I put out a frantic electronic plea to our parish, and with the Catholic parishes in the Parkersburg area, as well as the Parkersburg United Methodist Parish, we collected 1.5 tons of food to take to Roane County. Mm-hmm. But the thing that happened before that was that as people brought the food for collection, we had people of all denominations come, and I'm not really even sure how they heard we were collecting the food. But we had Baptists, we had Mormons, we had people from the neighborhood who came by, didn't know what we were doing. We said we were collecting food because of the storm, and some of them frequent our own food pantry, and they brought us food. We had a young woman come who was frantic to get off drugs, and she asked for the pastor. And we said, "Pastor isn't here," but it just happened that our district lay leader was helping at that moment. And we surrounded that young woman, and we prayed for her and gave her strength, and then we continued to try to follow up with her until we lost track of where she went. She was trying to get into rehabs. So there is ministry in some of the most unsuspecting places, and you never ever know who's going to come together to become a part of that. The Lord brings those people to us, and for us to be able to work together. So never discount any place where you can go work in ministry or with whom you can work in ministry.
Absolutely. Thank you. We really are better together when we work together than when we try to do the Lone Ranger thing. And that is really what one of the enduring marks of Methodism, of the United Methodist Church, is our connection. As we're envisioning the new thing, one of those roots that we really need to continue to cultivate and nurture is the connection, because that is what distinguishes us, and it is a source of our strength and our ability to transform the world for Jesus and with the power of the Holy Spirit. And so a lot of the stories that were just shared were stories of ministry that was happening on a local church level. The role of the local church is to connect people with God, both the people in the church, but people who are outside of the church, and to connect with the communities that it serves. Now, that can be the geographic community. That's always a good place to start. But there are communities that are by affinity, language communities. There may be communities related to educational or social concerns. So when I say community, I'm thinking of an all-encompassing community. But really, if you are in a place geographically, it's always a good idea to try to reach the people who are in that place with you. So the role of the local church is to connect people with God and to connect with the community or the communities that you seek to serve. There is a quote that I read somewhere along the way that says, "Those churches that make people full of God will have pews that are full of people." And I think that's so powerful. Now, as we're talking about the missional church and doing the new thing, our conception of church is changing. So it may not necessarily be a pew. It could be a chat room. It could be a stool in a bar. It could be the back of the bookmobile in the back of the car or a dog show. So the church can be, it does not have to be in a sanctuary with pews. But I still think that the idea of people, of churches that are committed, the missional church, that's committed to making people full of God will be full of people, is so powerful. But it requires that we fall in love and have a heart for people. We've got to fall in love with our communities again. There's been a piece of research that says that the longer a church exists in a community, the less able it is to actually define who the community is. When a church is first there, or when a church is a new church start, they're really good at being able to identify and describe the community. But within the United Methodist Church, the research shows that the longer the church is in a place, the more disconnected it becomes from the people that are around it. Why? Because when a church first starts, its whole goal is to reach people. So it begins to be in the community to attract, and then when the people come in, then it becomes about how do we order the life of the church, and we become inwardly focused. And about how do we serve the members that we have, rather than how do we prepare the members that we have to serve those who are outside of the walls. And so that's one of the things that we need to really begin to keep in our purview as we talk about risk-taking ministry, connecting people with God and connecting with the community, is you've got to know the community. You have to know who is my neighbor. In order to connect with people, you've got to know people, and you've got to care about who they are and what they're going through. And so our churches that are really struggling to reconnect with the community or determine if they want to reconnect with the community are churches that are in conversations about what is our mission, who are we, what is the purpose that God is calling us to, and who is our neighbor. These are central to the work of the local church, and it really means that this making disciples, to make disciples, that internally in our local churches, the job is to help build up the community of members that you have so that they are effective in making disciples. It's not about sustaining the membership that you have. It's about using the community internal to the church to make a difference outside of the church. So if you can't extend beyond the walls, if you're struggling to get out of the walls, if the focus of all of your administrative council meetings are how are we going to take care of us, our property, our staff, our members, and not saying how is our property, our staff, and our members an extension of our commitment to a mission that takes us outside of the church, then you're having a very limited conversation and you're not yet at the place of being a missional church. And it also means that the mission of making disciples who make disciples gets lost because you're only focusing on one set of disciples. It can't be either or, it's both and. We're forging our own discipleship we make discipleships for the transformation of the world. If Jesus came it wasn't just for us, not just for the people in this room, not just for the people in the church. Jesus died for the transformation of sin and the transformation of the world. And now we are the disciples who are keeping that effort going. Greater work shall we do when we take up seriously the gift that God has placed in us to do the work of ministry. And so, local churches, reaching out to the communities that are around them, falling in love with people again. This is something that really it bears some attention. And this is one of the things that the Commission on Religion and Race is really working on, this question of who is our neighbor. Part of the way that we are reshaping the conversation, when I say we're moving from racism to relationships, is that our focus is on the conversation about who is my neighbor and how do we effectively reach those neighbors. How do we get out of our own ways? Jesus has already broken down the dividing wall. We're the ones that continue to build it up. So how can we be also the ones that get out of our own way and get out of God's way, so that we don't have to continue to climb over the walls of injustice, to climb over the walls that we erect of the isms, but we are free. We're liberated through the power of the Holy Spirit to transform the world for Christ. So who is my neighbor? We often talk about in the church, if you just love people enough and if you just love God enough, then all the work will the work will get done on its own. That all it takes to reach people who are different is just to love Jesus. Well, loving Jesus is a great place to start. And we need some additional tools in our toolkit if we are serious about actually making a difference for people, whose lives we're called to touch. We set a lot of denominational goals, and for a while we talked about setting some age goals in terms of bringing young people into the life of the church. I often think if we had a goal of, within 50 years, 20 years, I don't do that time stuff, but if we had a goal of this sometime in the foreseeable future, that the average United Methodist would look like the average world citizen, how would that turn our mission on its head? If the average United Methodist, the average person that affiliated with the United Methodist Church reflected the average world citizen, because our average membership actually doesn't even look like the population of the world or the United States today. We're pretty far disconnected from the average American, and definitely very far removed from the demographics of the average world citizen. But if we took up as a goal that the average United Methodist would look like the average person in our communities, what would that mean? What would that mean if you took that on in your church? For some of you, you may think that, well, we're already there. But I would encourage you to look a little closer, because all of our communities are changing, and not just racially. They're changing in terms of technology. They're changing in terms of culture. There are a whole generation of people who are coming up who are unchurched, who've never had the experience of being in a church. And so our ability to reach those young people who are not in church, have never been in church, and who have parents who have never been in church, that's a generational shift that we need to get our heads around in the church. That people are not growing up in the same way that many of us in this room have. Yes, we can raise our hand and say that we made a commitment to Jesus at an earlier age, but the people that we're reaching will be able to say that in far less numbers than what we have. Most of them would not be able to raise their hands, which means that for us to get outside of our own experience and into their experience means that we've got to have some skills. We have to have the love of Jesus in our heart, but we also have to have some skills to be able to make that leap. It's about knowing who your neighbor is, but actually having the skill sets to engage that neighbor when you encounter them. So this is part of the work that the commission is doing, and we're talking about reaching more people, younger people, more diverse people, in a conversation about who's our neighbor. What we're really focusing on is how do we transform people's heart sets, their mindsets, and their skill sets. We talk a lot about cultural competency, and I have a couple of slides around intercultural competence, because I think this is the mechanism, this is the vehicle for taking the vision and putting arms and legs and hands and feet on it, so that as we do go out making disciples who make disciples, we do it in a way that possesses what we call mindsets, heart sets, and skill sets to build right relationships across cultures. That's what intercultural competence is. And when I say cultural, I'm not just talking about race. Yes, I'm talking about race, and there are definitely some things that we need to do to continue to build up racial ethnic churches, multicultural churches, but I'm also talking about culture in terms of language. I'm talking socioeconomic culture. I'm talking about the cultures of those who are part of addiction communities communities. We heard a story about that yesterday. I'm talking about the culture of young people. So how is the church developing its ability, its competence? Now, there's no like Zen Jedi hovering like the Matrix. I now see the Matrix because I'm so competent at seeing cultures that, all I do is flow through life and it's just so clear to me. There's no nirvana of this. We're always in the process of learning and developing our skills around working across cultures. Why? Because culture is fluid. It's not static. We want to put people in a box and say, these are the rules for people who are in the African American box, and these are the rules for the people in the Hispanic box. But culture doesn't work that way. It's fluid. It changes. As generations go on, the experiences of groups of people, the story of the people shifts and changes. And as a result, the culture changes as well. And so we're always in a process of developing our ability, our competence to build those right relationships across culture. What do I mean by right relationships? Because we can have relationships with people, but they can be really bad relationships. So we're not just trying to build any old kind of relationship. We're trying to build holy relationships, right relationships. When I talk about right relationships, I'm talking about relationships of love, of respect, of justice, of care and compassion, of seeing the Christ in the other. Those are the types of right relationships I'm talking about. Not just the surface, hey, how you doing, but really knowing and loving the other, however you define that in your midst. Cultural competence is about our ability to go into a different culture or to begin to build bridges with different cultures in ways that show that we're serious about being missional in our outreach. So the first element or the first set of abilities that we need to be interculturally competent as a church and in your churches is mindsets. And there's a slide that talks about what a mindset is. So, I'll say this. Let's go back to that one because I didn't talk about that one. So right relationships. And we've talked about the right relationship as being what connects us to God and to one another. So right relationships are really demonstrated with what Jesus did on the cross, which was to connect us to God. And when we are, then we are connected to one another. And so to have those kinds of right relationships are really important. So the mindsets, knowledge and awareness. We're often prone, or I hear from time to time people who say things like, I don't see color, that everyone is the same. There is truth in, deep down, there are lots of things that make us similar, but we also have some differences. And it's not a bad thing to see the differences. It's not a bad thing for you to see me and acknowledge me for the parts of me that you know. Now, there's a lot of things about me that you may not know, but you can look at me and say, guess what? I'm black. Yeah, it's true. I know we didn't really want to go there because, I wasn't quite sure, but yep, it's true. And it's okay for you to identify, to see that and identify. Now, the problem comes when you think you know me because of what you see. Now, but it's okay to say, I identify that you're African American, and it's very possible as a result of that there might be certain experiences that I would have. There are cultural norms to every group. So there are certain things that I won't get into them, but there are things that, when we talk about like what's part of the culture of African Americans or the African American church, I probably have had those experiences. Why? Because I'm a part of that culture. Now, every person in the culture may not have had that, but there's a fair chance that I would have. And so when you see me, you can have an awareness of the things that you see, and you can be vaguely familiar with what that might mean. But what cultural competence helps us to do is to say, how do I go deeper? How do I acknowledge? How do I have a basic working knowledge and awareness of the things that I can see, but get past that in a place where I can really know who a person is in such a way that I can be in relationship, right relationship with them? That my assumptions, my stories don't just stop with what I see on the outside, but it makes me actually curious about getting to know one another better, especially if I don't have a lot of experiences with people who are in that particular cultural group. So the mindsets are about the knowledge and the awareness that we have of the differences that exist. And guess what, folks? The differences do exist. And they're important, because different does not mean deficient. It just means different. And because we're different, we are a demonstration of the creative genius of God. It's a good thing. It's a good thing, and our being aware of it is a good thing, and it actually helps to get us past some of those stuck moments. Sometimes we don't want to get to the places where it becomes difficult, so we just kind of want to paint everybody over with a brush of what we know and understand because we think it makes it easier, but it really doesn't. And people where our differences, the things that make us unique, those things are not acknowledged and honored, we have the sense of feeling left out, of feeling undervalued, of feeling as if our culture is deficient because it's not being acknowledged. So it's a good thing to be aware. When you're in your local churches, reaching out to those people in the community, it's okay for you to acknowledge who they are. It's okay for you to ask questions, to build the knowledge and the awareness of who they are, to get their stories. How else are you going to build right relationships if you don't know the people? And if you don't have a heart for them and can't talk with them and can't hear their stories, you'll never be able to be in discipleship relationship with them as well. And it'll be very difficult for you to transform their lives and transform the world. Going into that bar and holding a service, getting into someone else's world rather than expecting them to come and to be a part of what we're doing is a way of showing that you're beginning to have a mindset, a cultural competency around knowing, understanding, having awareness of who your neighbor is. There are a couple things that I want to say about the mindset, and then I'll move on. One is treating everyone as if they're the same may be unintentionally oppressive. We can acknowledge the differences that we have, and we can even celebrate what those are. The second is that we can recognize and work with the diversity that is already present in every group. One of the things that people often say to me in some conferences is, well, you know, we don't have any people of color, so there's really no reason for us to do anything with religion and race in our area, in our community, because there are no people of color. There's always diversity present in every group. And if we want to develop an ability to reach different cultures, we need to begin to look at the diversity that's already present within our own church and develop an ability to work with that. Most of you who are in local churches that have any kind of struggle have been probably involved in a cultural struggle of some sort. If you're if your church is in some sort of conflict about worship style, you're in a cultural conflict. If there is an influx or some new families that are coming in that have a different background or experience, maybe they're from a different socioeconomic group, you're in a cultural conversation. So there's an ability for us to really look critically about who we're being, how we're being disciples of Jesus Christ in the midst of the diversity of every single group that we're in relationship with. There is diversity in your local congregation. There is diversity in your community. That's the place to start. And as that diversity grows, you may find at some point that there is a greater influx of people of color. They're probably there, you just haven't seen them. But because there are very few places where there are absolutely no people of color. But start with the diversity that you have. You don't have to create it where it doesn't exist. There's diversity everywhere. So begin there. That's how you begin to develop the mindset for reaching across and building right relationships with one another when you can start with the diversity that already exists. The last thing that I will say about mindsets is that relationship building in the present means often healing the wounds of the past. When we invite people to come to our church, when they come with their stuff, their baggage, their past experience, maybe they're new to the faith, and one of the reasons why they haven't gone to church is because they had a really bad experience at some time in their life, and they come and they have hesitancy or they're apprehensive, and we want to say, that was then, this is now, we're different, get over it. Building relationships in the present means that you have to be able to hear and journey with people through their stories of pain in the past. This is particularly true when we talk about overcoming racial barriers. We often want to say, we don't want to hear about, slavery. We don't want to talk about that anymore. We want to get past that. And yes, we do need to move to a place where we can move collectively toward a new vision. But there is a pain there. That if we really have a heart for people and want to build right relationships with them, we have to make space for and journey with people in the healing of those past oppressive behaviors, because there is some element of that is still being lived today. So as you reach across cultures, no matter what those cultures are, there may be some stories that are not particularly happy. There are some memories, there are some experiences that people bring with them as part of how they know themselves. And part of one of the reasons that they're seeking to be a part of a faith community is because there's healing. There's healing in the name of Jesus is one of the songs that have been sung in my church. There's healing and there's wholeness and there's all sorts of things that people are seeking because they live broken lives. We all have places of pain. We can, if we really have a heart for people, we can't sweep the pain under the rug. We've got to be willing to journey through the pain with people and not get stuck in the pain, not get stuck in the past, but to have conversations with them that allow healing to occur so that together we can create a new future. This is all what it means to develop a cultural competency and developing new mindsets. The next is the heart sets, and I've mentioned a little bit of this before. The heart set is the attitudes. It's having the heart for people. And when we do have a heart for one another, for all of God's life, for the new conversation that God is having with all of life, then what we're talking about is having attitudes of curiosity, care, concern, compassion, empathy. These are the ways in which we demonstrate that we are developing a cultural competency by building up our heart tools to really reach others for Christ. Those attributes, those attitudes, that curiosity we have for people means that sometimes we're going to be in conversations with people and we're going to make mistakes. We're going to ask questions. We're going to say the wrong thing. We're going to be in uncharted territory. That is okay. We cannot be afraid to go to the uncharted territory. We may offend. We may say some things that were taken in the wrong way or out of context. But if we're developing a heart for people and the courage and the conviction to be risk-taking disciples, then we've got to be willing to put our hearts on the line as well, to be vulnerable with one another and to build those kind of trusting relationships. It's not easy work, especially when you're going into cultures that are different from yours. When you are in ministry with people that you have not been in ministry with before. When you're beginning to do a new thing, you're going to break some eggs. You're going to step on some toes. You're going to ruffle some feathers. It's okay. Because if you don't make the mistakes, how will we grow? And if the church only is content to being in its comfort zone with the people that it knows and that looks like how we look, then we're never going to be effective in being a missional church. This is part of taking the risk, and it really requires having a strong heart, but also a tender heart, so that we can hear other people's stories, take those risks, and move forward. A few principles around developing your heart set as you engage in ministry across cultures and with diverse people. There's something that I always say to folks, because of course when you're in a conversation and your job is to be in a conversation about something like race and racism, there's a lot of emotion that comes with that. So there's a lot of, I deal with a lot of anger, I deal with a lot of defensiveness, I deal with a lot, that's just kind of a part of the nature of being in a conversation about something that's not the most positive thing in the world. But one of the things that I say to the people that I work with and the people on my staff, hurt people hurt people. When people come with lots of emotion, lots of pain, lots of anger, lots of defensiveness, that's usually because they've been hurt. And so as you cross over, do that risk-taking new thing, you're going to get a little bit of backlash. You're going to push some edges and people are going to push right back. And one of the reasons they do that is because they're hurting. The world is broken. It's broken because of our racism and our sexism. It's broken because of economic injustice. It's broken because of a lot of things. And so people are hurting. And when they hurt, their expression comes out in hurting others. So part of developing that heart set is to make your heart strong, but also tender, because you are going to encounter people who are hurt, and they may try to hurt you. How are we building ourselves up on our most holy faith, as it says in the Bible? Building ourselves up on our most holy faith so that we can take the risk, do the risk-taking discipleship and move past the hurt. It also means us dealing with our own hurt, so that when we reach across into new places, into new spaces, we're not unintentionally hurting other people because we haven't dealt with our own pain. That's what it means to be effective in ministry. This is for lay and clergy people. This is for everyone who is forwarding the mission of God and extending ourselves into community. Hurt people hurt people. We've got to pay attention to the hurt. Don't sweep it under the rug. We've got to work with it. We've got to deal with it. And we've got to help people through the power of Jesus Christ to come to wholeness and healing. And that even means ourselves. One other principle related to building up our heart set: we can choose our attitudes about what we hear. So when you're in that bar, or when you're in the jail, the prison, when you're in whatever risk-taking place of ministry you feel called to, you're going to hear some things because it's real out there, folks. And sometimes we inoculate ourselves from the realness because we don't want to be influenced by the culture. So we're not in the cultural conversations. You know, we're called to be in the world, but not of the world. And sometimes we have a challenge with even getting in the world because we don't want to get out of our church. So when we hear some things, when we hear the things, when we hear the pain, when we hear the very real expressions of people, the language that they use and the things, we can choose our attitudes about that. When we engage in conversations across cultures and people say things that we might not want to hear, call us to accountability about even maybe our own blind spots, we can choose our attitude. We can use what we've heard and the meaning that we've made of it to build up walls of division, or we can choose to have an attitude of openness, a heart of love to receive and to work through. Because we cut ourselves off. We hear things we don't want to hear. We get challenged in ways we don't want to get challenged, and then we disconnect. We cut ourselves off. We send emails. We post something on Facebook, anything so that we don't actually have to be in direct relationship with one another. But we can choose the way we respond to the things that we hear in a world that's much different than what we are. And if we're going to have the ability, the competency to reach across cultures with that heart for people, it's going to require that we choose some positive, some empowering attitudes around how we deal with the differences that we encounter. The last the set that I want to talk about is the skill set. The skill sets that we need in order. These are the behavioral skills. We have a heart for people. We love people. We've opened our minds. We've been renewed by the transforming of our minds, and we've been transformed in our thinking because we've built these new relationships. But then we come face to face with new people, different people, younger people, and we say, what do I do now? How do I do it? How do I start this new ministry? How will I know it's being effective? I know I want to reach this group, but I don't know how to do it. Where do I start? This is where the behavioral skills, the skill set of cultural competency comes in. It's about our beefing up our abilities to communicate across cultures. That's both using language The words that we speak, the different contexts of language, it could be geographical language. For some of you, that might mean you have to go and take a few courses in Spanish or in some other language if you're wanting to reach a new community so that you can communicate in a way that builds relationships. You'll need new skill sets. You'll need to be able to be trained in how to understand the nuances of this new culture. They have certain ways of doing things that maybe you aren't familiar with. You might find and build a relationship with someone in that culture to say, teach me, help me to understand how to navigate this new terrain so that I can build up the skills that I need to be successful in building the relationships, the right relationships that make disciples that transform the world. Build relationship building, leadership, leading across cultures, the ability to manage, the ability to move around resources, to influence people across lines of difference. So you may need to take a class, or you may need to have some new conversations with some new people to develop those leadership skills so that your influence is felt, it's accepted, and it's reciprocated with mutual respect in new places. It's important to have skills. It is great to have the love of Jesus in your heart, and it's not enough. You really need to think about how are we equipping our church? How are we equipping lay and clergy leaders to be successful in places we've never gone before or places where we're just starting to scratch the surface? This is what it means to build a new skill set of cultural competency. Here are a few principles around developing skill sets. You have to have courage. You have to have courage in order to go in and do that new thing. You're not going to get it perfect. You can't wait till you get a certificate in working across cultures before you can start. You probably don't even need the certificate, but if you feel like it will help you, great, go and get it. But you have to have courage. You have to have the courage to begin to do the new thing. It has to come from just our ideas to action. When we begin with the actions to begin to take those first steps, that is how we develop the skill set. Listening is not the same as agreeing. Sometimes when we are in the midst of conflict or we're trying to build new relationships, we go and we sit down and have conversations, we listen to people, and somehow along the way there's some sense that because we had a conversation, we're on the same page about doing things. And we make assumptions because we're in communication. Listening is key. And in the listening, we've got to be explicit about when we're in agreement and when we're not in agreement. This is a source of a lot of cross-cultural, and every conflict is in some nature cultural. Every conflict, it doesn't matter if it's interpersonal, if it's within a group, at its very root, every conflict has some sort of cultural nuance to it because culture is just how we make meaning of things based on group identification. That's the kind of the basic definition of culture. And so we see things because in whatever the lens of culture you're looking at, because of your age, because of your theological understanding, because of where you were raised, because of your family of origin, you see things a certain way. That's the culture. So in some cultures, being in conversation, once we've talked about it, we walk away from the conversation, that means it's done. For others, it just means I listened to what you had to say and we didn't come to any agreement about it. And so listening for what people are having to say and being clear about what our commitment is. This goes back to yesterday when we were talking about our own discipleship walks and how we say that we own things that we really don't because we've said yes and didn't really mean it. That's a source of cultural conflict. And so part of the skill set is being able to be very clear in our communication in such a way that people are not left in our presence thinking that we've agreed to or are in agreement with things that we actually are not. Listening is not the same as agreement, but we've got to be intentional about the listening piece. Influencing people to take on the tough issues is done more easily in a spirit of hope. Part of the discipleship journey, friends, is we always have to leave people with hope. We always have to be lifting up people to the hope of who Jesus is and what's possible if we have faith and believe. So if we're talking about tackling tough issues like racism, if we're struggling in our ability to reach across the cultures, we can't give up, and we always have to leave people with hope. The hope that we can continue to work toward a new solution together. That's part of building up that skill set. How do you leave people with hope? It's by staying in conversation and not cutting each other off when the heat gets a little hot, because we're in new territory, because it will. When we begin to do that new risk-taking thing for Jesus, it's going to take us into some places and into some situations that we are not familiar with, and it won't be comfortable. But if we can stay with the hope, and if we can use all that we have, all the tools, the heart for people, our new understandings, our abilities to communicate, we will have demonstrated a competency in moving through the rough places to a place where we see a whole new vision, where we're seeing the manifestation of the kingdom of God right here on earth. Ultimately, that's what the hope is. We're not just here waiting around for the mothership to come. We're here, we're here to make a difference. We're here to begin to bring a little heaven onto earth. And you can't do that in a spirit of pessimism. You can't get past the things which keep us separated if we're resigned that it's always going to be this way. It can't ever change, and nothing different will ever happen. We always have to hold on to the hope. And as disciples who make disciples, if we don't have the hope, then how can we ever expect that the people that we reach will have the hope? How will we ever transform the world without hope? And so this is part of what it means to develop a skill set of competency around reaching into lines of difference. So I'm going to pause here. I've talked about having a mindset, a heart set, and a skill set. And I want to hear a little bit, just a few people who can share examples, stories of how you see new mindsets, new heart sets, new skill sets that either you are acquiring or that you have seen transform your church as you've done a new thing for Christ. Yes.
I'm Lee Williams. I'm Lee Williams. I'm a pastor of the Elizabeth United Methodist Church in Wirt County. And in dealing with differences, it's an ongoing conversation with the church and the parsonage family, because I have a twin brother who's deaf. And the church has embraced him. They don't know American Sign Language, but they have embraced him. The men are constantly harassing him, and they're good at it. And our ladies mother us something fierce. But there is we're in conversation, and I don't think we always fully know it, and it's beyond words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Definitely an example of how our mindsets get open because you've had an encounter with someone who's different. It begins to change your perspective about difference, and then the heart set begins to kick in because now you know what it means to love in action around differences. Thank you. Yes.
My name is Diane Knowlton, and I'm from the Mason United Methodist Church in the Western District. And last year, instead of having a vacation Bible school for our own church, we went into a low-income area and had a block party. And we encouraged all of our parents with kids to come and experience that with that community. And we probably had 50 to 60 people from our congregation go down into that area. And as we were speaking with the people and just communing with them, and I always gravitate to the moms with babies. And as I was talking to this mother, she said, what happened today was it changed the way we think that you think about us. Because no matter how we really think about them, all that matters is how they think we think about them.
Yeah.
So that was a huge awakening for us. And it was just a wonderful experience to be able to go down there and show them that it didn't matter, that we loved them. It didn't matter where they lived.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. Now, that really does begin the process of transformation, is our ability to take the first step to cross the line, to get in and to get into a new space and to show that we have love and concern, and to allow the other to experience that so that it changes and transforms their worldview and it transforms ours. And then when we start there and we begin to then say, so what do we each mutually want? And we work together. That's the solidarity piece. One of the things that I really want to encourage you as you continue to do this new thing in building the relationships is that the actions of caring about what the people in our community care about. When you care about what they care about, and when they are exposed to what you care about, that's when we really begin to move even from the transformation of our hearts into the types of actions that transform the world. Sometimes we're good in having charity ministries for less fortunate people, and we do really wonderful work. And it doesn't transform anything. We help the poor without transforming the systems which perpetuate poverty. We help people who are newly coming to this country, but we don't change the systems that make them challenged in the first place. And so it's part of the heart set, the skill set, the mindset is really as we build these relationships and transform our seeing of one another, that we begin to care about each other in such a way that we become allies for change, for transformation, for making a difference in the world. Is there anyone else? I thought I saw someone who was moving toward him. Yes, okay. Yes, 8, thank you. I thought I saw a movement, but go ahead.
Ariana Landis, youth delegate of Potomac Highlands District. One thing is, in my church, it's maybe a total of 100 people on a good day. It's pretty low down there. But it's full of a lot of the older generation people. You maybe get 5 or 6 of the younger people in there. And we have a youth group in the church, and then maybe about a mile down from there, we have this church camp. And it's, I guess, our youth group plus a couple other kids. And we have tried to make our camp into a place for teenagers, youth that haven't had the, I guess you say, Christian background that some of us had. And what we've done is we've joined our youth group and our camp together to form this. And we hadn't had very much adult support. But as we got on to, getting the youth involved, and the adults were kind of excited that we were getting involved, they started helping more, and they changed their mindset on us. They started having more faith in us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a great example of leadership and courage. And even in the face of no agreement, that you can go do that, but we're really not into that thing, or we're not so sure about it. People who have a passion for transformation, this is, once again, the risk-taking to do the new thing that God is calling you to do, even when you feel that there may not be complete agreement about that, is part of the leadership courage that it really takes to be disciples and that make disciples. Yes, number 4.
Stevens from the, am I on? Nancy Stevens, lay equalization delegate from Little Kanawha District. This isn't so much about the church that I'm in as it is with my work in criminal defense work. I recently had a client come to me who, in a very shortly after that, young black male actually from the Charleston area, he was killed in the jail at North Central Regional in a violent assault there. I was compelled to be a part of the service when he was buried, and through that and working with his family, I've met amazing folks that have been able to carry me through other cases that I'm working on where we have such an influx, I mentioned yesterday, of young black males from Detroit and the drug culture that is just coming in and is so pervasive. But through this case, what I've discovered is that I didn't understand their culture at all. I could not understand how young men could stand and say, I was there when a shooting occurred. I know the man that's charged didn't do it. I was right beside of him, and I said, oh, good, my work's done here. We'll get you to court, we're finished. Oh, no, I'm not going to court. You mean you won't stand up for your friend and say he didn't kill that man? No, I won't. That's not my responsibility. Through the course of Jerron Hawkins' death and meeting a community organizer in Charleston, West Virginia, Reverend Matthew Watts, that some of you down that way may know, it has been an unbelievable eye-opener for me to find that I just didn't understand that culture at all. And you know what? I bet you there's nobody else in this room that does either. We are challenged beyond belief to get in the trenches, to talk to these people, to understand why it is that they don't trust the justice system. Why is it they don't trust me when I'm there to help? Right. They don't trust me. I'm part of a system in their mind that has negated them, that has oppressed them, that has suppressed them, and denied them justice through generations. That's still there, and it's critical. You know, through all of that, I've become a member of the ACLU. It's just been an absolute God thing. It's just a God thing in my world. The way we've been able to bring these cases together and come to an understanding where I can actually sit now in these jails and meet with these young men, talk to them, pray with them in their cells, and talk to their families and pray with them on the phone. It's been amazing. And I know that this is something God is using to prepare me for something greater. There's no doubt in my mind. And there's no doubt, for those that are here from Sand Hill, you'll hear more of it because I know that it's a part of what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah. But you have to be willing to hear. You have to be willing to first recognize. You know what it took? God is my witness. And then I'm finished. A young man said to me from Detroit in the jail one day, you ain't nothing but a fat old white woman sticking your nose where it don't belong. And I said, well, you're right about the old, you're right about the fat, but I do believe my nose belongs here because God tells me it does. Yep. And he sat and opened up and talked to me. Yep. We got to be willing to talk about our differences.
That's right, and get past the pain, because hurt people hurt people. And so if we have the courage to stay in it, I mean, that's a wonderful example of what it means to, in the trenches, develop the competency. Because if you would have walked in saying, I've got the love of Jesus in my heart, and so it's all going to be okay, and you heard that, you would have shut down. But you know that there are some other tools that you need to begin to break through, and one of those is a skill set around listening, and there might be some other things that you're doing as well. That's cultural competency in action. So this will be the last one. Yes.
Marilyn Yule from Kenya. We travel by motorcycle most of the time, and I got a ride with somebody I didn't know, and we were on our way home, and he said, I have a question for you. And I said, okay, and we're tooling down the road slowly, and he said, you know, he said, I really don't like beating my wife. But everybody expects me to beat my wife, and that's how it's done. He said, how can I be a good husband? And I said, pull this thing over. and he was an orphan himself. He didn't have a father. He didn't have any example of what a husband does or what a father does. And I said, okay. I said, you're going to be my boda man. That's my motorcycle taxi. And I said, I'm going to give you some homework. I said, are you willing to do it? He said, yeah. He said, I really want to be a good husband to my wife. And I said, okay. I said, is your wife a good cook? Yeah. I said, have you ever told her that she's a good cook? Ever? No. I said, okay, that's your homework for today. I said, I want you to go home and just tell your wife, you know, she's cooking the regular stuff, and I said, just tell her how good it is and how it's such a wonderful thing that he married a good cook. I said, that's your homework for today. Well, every week he picked me up, and every week I would give him homework. And I would say, did you do what I told you to do? He said, yeah. He said, it's really working. You know? But the example of a good husband is not there. And he really didn't have any ideas. And so that was just a cross-cultural thing that, you know, I step on a lot of people's toes, and I say the wrong thing, and everybody says, oh, well, we can't do that here. And I said, well, why not? You know? And they teach me how to do things. Like when I was in Uganda, the women that I was working with had never seen anything planted in rows. And so we were planting gardens, and they said, well, why do you plant in rows? And I had to think about it. They said, you know, and so they taught me to reevaluate my system of what I do too. So
yeah,
it's,
thank you. Also, you know, having the heart of a learner, you know, being willing to share but also to learn is key to developing that competency. Disciples, making disciples who make disciples is both an inside job, but it's also an external job. You have been on this journey in this annual conference to begin to catch a new vision of what God is doing and will do and can do through you. And so I applaud you, and I encourage you, just as Paul encouraged Timothy, to keep going, to don't stop, to not be weary in well-doing. Because this is really what it takes to transform the world. I thank you for sharing your stories. Because if we can continue to find ways to listen and to hear and to celebrate the new things that God is doing all across this area, all across the church, then we will live ourselves into a new reality. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take us being open as Jesus makes us into disciples more and more, deeper and deeper every day. And then we turn around and sharing that with everyone that we come in contact with. So I want to leave you with just this scripture once again from 2 Timothy. God has saved us and has called us to this holy calling, to this life, the one that we have right now. God has called us to, not because of anything that we're doing, but because of what God is already doing. Because God has a purpose, and God has shown us mercy and grace. So live in the mercy and grace of God and use that boldly as you go into new places, doing a new thing, a new beginning for the kingdom of God on earth and for the reign and the realm of Jesus the Christ everywhere you go and with all people that you touch. Thanks be to God for all of you. And if you ever need to contact me, find the General Commission on Religion and Race. Our website is www.gcorps.org, or come and talk with me and I'll give you my information. Thank you so much, Bishop Steinerball, and God bless all of you.